Welcome to Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Your Daily, we talk about what it looks like to give back. Sarah Heineman with Landus joins us to go over initiatives, outreach, and volunteering opportunities that support one of the missions of farmers. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Your Daily. And joining me on Farm Your Daily, we're going to take a look at community engagement, giving back to your rural locations and sometimes the urban areas as well. And to do so, we have with us Sarah Heineman, the Director of Community Engagement with Landus. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily. And tell us a little bit about the scope of what you work with. What do you do as someone who directs community engagement?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So community engagement is at the root of Landus's history, even the history before Landus became Landus when it was Farmers Co-op and West Central. Giving back to local communities was and is absolutely at the core of what we do, because it matters to not only our farmer owners, but to the employees who live and work in these communities. So my role really is to help support our employees who are out in the fields, out in the rural communities, supporting our farmers day to day, to support and guide on how we approach community engagement. They know the communities they live in. Our farmers know the communities they live in. And so my role is to help keep a pulse on that and support them in any way that I can. I also ensure that Landus from a corporate level, so we also give at a more corporate level, which some of those organizations are perhaps statewide organizations that touch every corner of the state of Iowa. So I help ensure that we have a process for our charitable giving and that we're being good community partners at every level of the company. Even if Landus doesn't give something or support a specific cause, we want to have a seat at the table to understand what's going on, whether it's locally or more statewide, and ensure that we are being, again, good stewards of community engagement.
Why is it important to have community engagement as an agribusiness? What does it do for maybe more so than just the community? What does it do to help support what farmers are all about?
Yeah, that's a really great question. At the end of the day, Landus exists because we have farmer owners. And we know that small communities, every community in the state of Iowa has various challenges. And like you said, community engagement helps those communities, but it also helps support the businesses that our farmer owners run, the business that we run at Landus, obviously having locations and services across the state of Iowa. And when we look at where Landus really engages on a community level, we think about our work in three buckets, if you will. Rural vitality, that really means what is that specific issue in a rural community? Each community, again, is unique, and how can we help support that effort? So an example would be food insecurity. We know that food insecurity is a big issue across the state, perhaps more disproportionately in rural communities where there might be food deserts. So if Landus can understand that this is an issue, we might have an employee or a grower who's experiencing food insecurity. And so we want to support those initiatives that ultimately make a community stronger, so that I live near Ogden, so that in Ogden, Iowa is around in 20 years, because we're supporting these efforts that really make a community vibrant. And that helps our growers have strong businesses and also helps Landus have a strong business, strong seat at the table again. That's the second area that we focus on, which again is really important to the ag industry, is youth ag leadership. So making sure that Landus is helping those youth in communities not only be strong leaders for the communities they live in, but if they want to go into the ag industry, we are helping grow that next generation of leaders. And those could be, youth or students who want to go back to a family farming operation, or maybe they want to work for a company like Landus and they want to do IT or legal or marketing and communications or community engagement. Helping really share that when you think about ag, there are so many more career paths than perhaps working at an elevator or going back to a family farming operation. And we see that as again, being a good steward of the ag industry as a whole, not just for Landus and not just for our communities that we serve, but the whole industry. And then our third pillar of our community engagement is community pride. And that means supporting any kind of effort where you're gathering people, especially in a rural community, to build social capital, to celebrate their small town. Every small town in Iowa has a town festival. Those things are really important. And you're getting folks out, you're getting our farmer owners are in the parades too. They are helping serve at the hot dog stand. And so being alongside our peers and our farmers, our employees, it's not only the right thing to do, but it's also really fun. And that really helps build that strong fabric that we know makes rural communities thrive.
Kind of piggybacking off of what you just mentioned there, and I aim to keep this non-political, so keeping politics out of this. But we do have a situation where there is a bit of concern of food insecurity at the moment with SNAP benefits is kind of the current topic. Yep. And we know that food banks have been putting out notices that they really need donations, they need support, they need help around the state. And there have been mentions of ways to support, et cetera. But as someone who engages with that side, and as someone who understands the general notices of, I think the stat is something like 40% of SNAP recipients are children, and it's a big part of what helps out young children, but also just the idea that giving back and making sure food insecurity shouldn't exist within America's heartland and the breadbasket. Yeah. How do you engage with that?
So that's a really great question. We engage on multiple levels. So again, our local employees, they are involved in local food pantries across the state, whether we have a couple employees who are on boards. We've hosted several drives for food pantries across the state historically, and we will continue to do those efforts. So I'll name a couple. The Clarksville Food Pantry is one who we've hosted drives for and supported with charitable dollars. The Bryceland Food Pantry, which is right across the Iowa border into Minnesota, one of our employees is on their board. Again, hosted a food drive for them. Those are just a couple examples of efforts that we have on the local level across the state. Landus receives a lot of requests from local-based food pantries for charitable dollars, which 9 times out of 10, we're going to support that because one, we're an ag company. And so that definitely matches with what our mission is as being an ag company.
Right.
And I would say on, kind of the second level of that, David, is I try to more on a statewide level engage with those organizations who are helping combat food insecurity. And a great example is I was giving an email exchange this morning with the executive director of Iowa's Healthiest State, and I'll give them a little bit of a shout out. They have great programs that help combat food insecurity, and one of those is Double Up Bucks. And so I shared with their executive director this morning, let us know how we can help. And so trying to understand at the state level, what is happening? Do those efforts impact? Of course, we want to ensure they're impacting the counties that Landus serves, but it goes beyond that. We care about every county in Iowa. But when we think about, Double Up Food Bucks, for example, I was looking at their list this morning, they serve close to all 99 counties. And I think most of those counties are in our service area as Landus. So that makes sense for Landus to help support the work that they are doing. So again, that's the seat at the table concept that I shared, is making sure we have a seat at the table. We're understanding what is happening across the state. How can we help? Whether it's financially, whether it's, advice, whether it's a letter of support. There's so many ways that we can not just give dollars, but engage. So that would be the more systemic approach too, that I try to help from my seat, and just from what I'm able to do is try to help ensure that we understand those things. And again, I was looking at a map this morning. I think there's 6 regional food banks across the state. And so outside of even helping support our very local food pantries, I'm going to send those resources out to my colleagues and say, hey, here's other ways that our employees on the ground can support one of these 6 food pantries. And those food banks do such a great job of providing toolkits, if you will, to say, here's how you can support us, and just spreading that awareness and making sure that we know how to help and know it's actually going to move the needle for some of these organizations who are really doing the heavy lifting as it relates to food insecurity and the SNAP benefits right now.
Is there a bit of a call to action right now? How can folks potentially engage with that since it is, one of the big news items of the month?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, wherever you live, reach out to your local, whether it's a food pantry or some communities have food shelves where they are more like a bag with maybe some essentials, and so they can give those out to folks just to get them through a week or two. That'd be one. Two, from Landus's perspective, I have a meeting later today to kind of help finalize what our communication is going to be to put out on what we are doing specifically for some of the food insecurity issues. So I would say look for that, because we can point folks in the right direction of organizations who are doing really great work.
Sarah, as you approach this topic and you work with making sure folks have that level of support in charity and also in volunteers, as kind of what I'm getting from what you've talked about, how does community engagement and supporting communities specifically help out rural development and essentially building thriving rural communities?
Yeah, sure. So from Landus's perspective, I would say, again, it's that seat at the table and understanding what each community's unique opportunities are or perhaps challenges are. And I'm trying to think of an example recently. So we've supported several projects, obviously across the state, and one would be the Laurelville, Iowa is building a splash pad. And so they, of course, want local businesses to help support their efforts. When we think about projects like a splash pad or projects like a playground or a new community center, what is that doing to a community? It's not just the activity of building it or the activity of supporting it, it's what's that outcome that we're hoping to drive toward? And those are the questions I ask myself when we talk about internally on this splash pad is a place for kids, it's a place for families. X community center is a place for people to gather. It's a place that's going to help build that social capital. And when you think about community development and the aspects that make up an entire community, we need all forms of capital. You need social, environmental, political, economic. And so when all those things work in concert together, that's when we're going to have a thriving community. So wanting to make sure that in many of the communities, Landus is one of the only businesses in that community. And so we certainly want to understand what's going on. And again, when I think about my role, I try to help keep a pulse on what's happening maybe at the state level, if you will. And I'm not talking from like a legislative perspective. We have a vice president of external relations who handles the legislative piece. It's really, Iowa Economic Development offices, rural economic development, Debbie Durham's office. Like what are those groups all focusing on? The USDA, rural development. What are those groups focusing on that we just need to know about? And or we can help connect some dots. And so in my role too, a lot of what I try to do is connect the dots for folks. Again, with the Laurelville splash pad and other projects that we've had come up, I try to think, okay, what resources could I help connect this community to that they probably already know about, because everyone in this state is very resourceful. But if I could help make a connection or help bridge that gap, that might sort of wrap our arms around some of these, in some cases, pretty big obstacles that communities have to overcome.
Sarah, what would you say is the biggest challenge, or maybe as well a big success, as you look towards the future of engaging with the community here in Iowa and trying to support local areas and folks in need?
I think one of the things I love most about my role is I'm always really floored at the number of people who want to be engaged and who want to make something successful, make a community successful. We get requests all the time, which is awesome. And I feel like it's hard to help everyone. It's hard to do everything. It's hard to respond to everything. which is such a good sign. So the passion is there. I think the passion is there, especially in rural. The people are there. I know we've seen this shift, right, to folks moving more to urban areas or even moving out of the state of Iowa, if you will. But I do believe since we've had more of maybe perhaps the work from home or some cultural shifts or lifestyle shifts that people want to make, I see there being a big opportunity for more people to move back to communities. It's interesting to think about the dynamic of like where maybe a regional like hub would be. So like a bigger city, if you will, or a town of 10,000 plus that has some of the more amenities in the proximity of that town to the smaller communities around it. And how, when I think about the dynamic of our state, where those communities sit, and then the opportunity for people to live in some of the smaller towns, perhaps outside of them. So I feel so much pride all the time when I go around the state of Iowa. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of things that we need to make sure we're supporting, we being collectively across the state, and really having that balance between, from population density in our urban areas to where our rural communities are. Because again, when we all consider the state of Iowa, if farming operations and agriculture doesn't exist, neither does our state. And so there's really I think a big opportunity to kind of ride on the coattails of the great projects and the great people in communities today and rural communities today. And there's a ton of potential there.
Sarah, what are some opportunities and some availabilities or ways for folks to learn out more about what you folks over at Landus are doing?
Sure. Well, I mentioned really the 3 areas we focus our giving on, but we also have our core grant program. And Landus's core grant program focuses on FFA chapters, EMS, county fair boards, and 4-H groups. And we focus really on the counties where Landus has a significant presence for all of those areas. Each quarter, we send a letter out to invite said organizations or chapters within those 4 areas to apply for funding. In our core grant program, again, it goes throughout the year. So Q1, we have FFA chapters, then Q2 EMS, county fair boards, and 4-H. And obviously those core grants really are, again, kind of at the core of where Landus wants to make sure we're supporting efforts that specifically target youth ag leadership, but also EMS. We all know that rural communities are many times quite a distance away from a hospital and or an ambulance service. And so supporting EMS is incredibly important as it relates to ensuring we have quality safety in communities. The other piece would be our scholarship program. So here yet in November, we will send a news release out, and there'll be more information on our website, landus.ag, that has information on scholarships. Landus gives out 5 $2,000 scholarships, again, to youth who are pursuing a career in ag or life sciences at any institution, but it's specifically geared toward Landus farmer owners so that we are supporting their families in their educational endeavors. And then again, if someone has a more broader project that they would like Landus to support, on our website, we have a donation and sponsorship form. And when those requests come in, it takes 4 to 6 weeks, usually way less, to get a response if there's a project that anyone's interested in having us get involved in.
Sarah Heineman is the Director of Community Engagement with Landus. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on Farm Your Daily.
Thanks, David.
This is Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I'm your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.